here, some from last week and the week prior as well. So really exciting to see so many people come back to back. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. Just to double check with the team, that's we're like flying a plane as we go. Laura and Soma, you will have an eye on the waiting room, right? To allow people coming in. I think you have co-hosting privileges for Zoom. And Laura, you'll be helping us navigate the slides too. Yep. Okay, so maybe we can go ahead and put on the first slide, and then I will begin the recording and we can get started. Sound good? All right, everybody. One moment, and here we go. All right, everyone. Hi, my name is Courtney Savvy-Lawrence. I'm one of the volunteers with the Circular Design Lab, and we are on our third installment of the three-part pop-up series, Getting to Zero, right, from PM2.5. We are focused on air pollution, health, quality, and ultimately, moving towards sustainable long-term change, which does connect with policy. So this one is a series we partnered with the Thailand Clean Air Network, which of course we're going to be hearing more about in just a moment. But specifically, our very first one launched on Earth Day, we actually covered the connection between COVID, air pollution, and what does that mean for the impact of the case in Thailand. Last week, we met on Wednesday as well, and we focused on Northern Thailand and the issues around the fires that are happening, but also looking at it from more of a data science and an actual human experience. So we had speakers to the anecdotes, the stories of what's happening, and some of the issues that are connected to that. This third one, Grassroots to Government, is really about what can we all do as a collective. Everybody has a role to play. This is an issue that affects over 90% of the world. And specifically in Thailand, we've seen over the years, the issue evolve and in some cases become very hazardous. So we're really lucky to have fantastic speakers share their different experiences. And I'm really happy to introduce my co-host, Kun Wina, who is one of the co-founders of the Thailand Clean Air Network. So over to you, Kun Wina, and then we can share a little bit of who we're going to have on our lightning panel today and then get right into it.
Thanks so much, Courtney. สวัสดีค่ะสำหรับคนที่เป็นคนไทยนะคะจะเล่าให้ฟังว่ามันจะมีการแปลเข้าไปในแชทนะคะเผื่อใครที่ไม่ถนัดภาษาอังกฤษนะคะ Hi, my name is Weena. I'm one of the co-founder of the Thailand Clean Air Network. We're predominantly a volunteer group of professionals who basically got together because we could not stand the fact that air pollution is a looming crisis. And we can't see ourselves being able to operate without breathing clean air. As we know, you can probably survive a few days without clean water, but ultimately you can't survive more than a few minutes without clean air. Our group is unique in that we are a multidisciplinary group. We've brought together people from various different facets because this is a very complicated issue and it requires an equally complicated way to resolve it. And so that's who we are. And I'm very proud today to actually present 5 extraordinary speakers. The very first speaker is Dr. Wirun Limsawat. He is in fact one of a partner co-founder with myself in the Thailand Clean Air Network. Dr. Wirun is what you call a double doctor. He is a medical doctor by training, but he also has a PhD in anthropology from the University of Harvard. And he's been very active in the Thailand Clean Air Network, pushing for the development of the Citizen Air Platform, which is a platform to bring about all the different monitoring stations for air pollution into one space. On top of that, he's also been the driver for the Air Quality Health Index, which is something he's working very actively within his role within the Ministry of Public Health. On top of that, he also works as the head of Society and Health Institute at the Office of Permanent Secretary within the Ministry of Public Health. So without further ado, let me open the space up to Dr. Wirun Ka.
Okay, and actually just real quickly, sorry to do that. We will get into that in just a moment. we also have the Q&A option here. So for some of you, this might be the first session you're joining. And what we're trying to do is keep the chat box specifically for translation into Thai, although we have that there if needed. But if you are following along in Thai, you can see the translation happening in real time. But with menti.com, with this code 772819, as you might have questions throughout the lightning panel, which is the first part of this session, please go ahead and feel free to enter those questions and let us know as the moderators. We'll keep an eye on that and we'll connect with your questions a little bit later on. And I think what we'll do is go ahead and share just real quickly the other speakers that we're going to be hearing from, and then hear from Dr. Weaver. So following the following speaker, we have someone very much connected to the science and the conundrums around air policy, but coming from the perspective of the UNDP, and that's Christine Wellington Moore, who will share a little bit more about this issue, which of course is not only affecting Thailand, but from a perspective of transboundary issues as well. We also have private sector lens here with us, and Charles Turner has been with us in Chiang Mai, I should say, for 12 years, has been working as a business owner, but also on the complexities and the issues of those that are being deeply affected by the crisis, which has been worsening over time. Another perspective we wanted to bring in, of course, is not only business and not only policy and government, but one of artists and creativity. And so with us, we have one of the best people we could imagine coming to the conversation today with us, which is Kun Tawisak. And finally, another voice and lens of a private sector nature, but based out of Bangkok, not Chiang Mai in the sense, is Jeffrey O'Rourke. So what we envisioned is a lightning panel where each of the speakers will share just a few minutes of their perspective, of their experience, of their vision, and then open this conversation up to be one that's for everyone. So over to our very first speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here, and I think I'm be here because of I'm a person. I'm a father. I'm a doctor, and I'm a government officer. So we all have multiple identities come into the issue of air pollution. And at the beginning, I come into this issue because I am a father, and my wife asked me, how do we can do anything about air pollution in Bangkok for our 3 kids? So this inspiration bring me into this issue. So I bring in my multiple identities. As a doctor, I think it is a health issue that we must do something to change it. And as an anthropologist, I think it is a problem of inequality. The health inequality is about the justice issue because everyone breathes the same air, but each person affects differently. But so it's unfair. That's why I come into the group of people, including Winorin and many other people, try to think together that how do we can work together from multiple identities, multiple professions to solve the problem. And my last and my primary identity is I'm a government officer in the Ministry of Public Health. So it is the role of the government to do something to save life and health and well-being of people. So that's why I think this session is very important, that we all, not only the citizens as an active citizen, we all as a private sector, as a civil society, as a government, have to try to find ways to work together. So this is the thing that air pollution is very complicated issue. And what I'm trying to do to use my my identity as a doctor and anthropologist is to try to understand the complexity of this issue. And I begin by the suggestion of a lawyer a professor at the Chulalongkorn University, Dr. Kanungnit, who suggests us to think about the right to know, the right to information about the air pollution, the status of air pollution, and also the suggestion for the health of people. So that's why I begin to work to create a network of air monitors that we call the Citizen Air Monitoring Network. That is the main focus to protect the right to know of people. If everyone can know the status of the air quality and they can actively protect themselves, and then it will become the basis for each person to actively participate as a citizen watchdog to identify the source of air pollution and try to connect with the government officer, with the authority to enforce the law to stop the air pollution sources. That's what I'm doing. It is enough for this because I'm trying to keep it short.
That's great. Thank you for the intro. We'll go into more of the curious questions for you quite soon. So like we mentioned, if you're just joining, this is a lightning panel. So we're going to hear from each of our panelists, our speakers. And up next, we have Christine Wellington Moore, who works full-time here out of Bangkok with the UNDP regional hub. So Christine, if you could share a little bit about from the perspective of the UN work in space.
Sure. So good afternoon, good evening. Not sure where everyone is logging in from. You know, to follow on from the previous speaker, I mean, I am originally from Barbados, small Caribbean island, and I'm living in Bangkok. And, you know, I too have experienced over the last few years, I've seen as just a resident, a guest of the Thai government, I see the changes in air quality. And, you know, from my perspective, my formal title is this SDG integration. What does that mean? It's to looking at how are we undermining, in part, how can we find solutions to all of the problems that are not allowing us to achieve the sustainable development goals? And whilst most people look at air pollution and think of fighting air pollution, from where I sit and where my team sits, we kind of look at the drivers of air pollution. And the drivers are really the fact that we are on unsustainable economic models. It does indeed speak to inequality. Very often, the reason we are embedded in these models is that there is a large inequality. You have business models that don't recognize that only tracking financial gains without subtracting the losses of human, animal, environmental health. You end up with this really skewed way of doing things that invariably leads to environmental degradation. And air pollution is but one symptom. We know about plastic in oceans, we know all of these different things. So it is actually what we're looking at in UNDP is looking at how can we address the drivers. Now, of course, we are all living in COVID period, and we know a lot of the research has come out that exposure to bad air makes populations more vulnerable to COVID. And more than that, actual fine air particles, the virus adheres to the particles and it helps it spread more. The reasons why it was more, it killed more people in Italy and things like that, they're beginning to look into that. And the same research was found with SARS, that actually having more particulates in the air made the virus spread faster and be more deadly. So for all of these reasons now, especially where we sit right now, it's no longer about a trade-off, economic trade-off versus, health and social benefits. Actually, you can't separate the two. If you don't get your environmental, human, and animal health correctly, then you're going to have a problem. And another interesting statistic to consider is that 75% of the diseases, the infectious diseases we've had in the last 30 years have come from animal disease jumping to humans. That's 75% in the last 30 years, which means we have passed a threshold. We are operating in the wrong space. We are taking too much out of the environment, and it's having a very real impact. So in terms of addressing this, and we are talking through our Thai country office, we're looking at this situation and seeing where the UN, not only UNDP, but bringing in other partners as well, whether they be other agencies, civil society, private sector, etc. We want to look and see where we can look at this system. It is a complex system. It has to balance all the health things I mentioned. It has to balance, yes, economics. It has to balance jobs. How can we create green jobs? We cannot do these things at the expense of jobs. So we are positioning ourselves to help governments in that space, and recognize also that a lot of our connections are also through things like migrant labor. Some of the less sustainable business models sometimes are exported to neighbors, maybe in Laos or Myanmar. You have people who are looking for work crossing the border and often taking the dirtiest jobs, so they get exposed more. You have weak legislation and weak tracking of these things. So it's really, truly complex, but that is what we're here to figure out. And that is where the tighter transboundary comes in. We don't operate in a vacuum. Everything we do affects others, but other things that others do affect us. And we may not know, as we bitterly quarrel about maybe, pollution coming over the border, we may not realize that we have a role in it. Maybe our waste is going over the border and they're burning it, and the smoke is coming back to hit us. So we are all in it together. And that's basically what UNDP wants to do, to show the systems, the drivers, and to ultimately come up with a mutually beneficial way of doing things where we can preserve human health, we can create green jobs, and we can reduce air pollution. So that's my spiel. Thanks.
Thanks, Christine. Well said, and perfect segue, because this panel is ultimately about what can we all do collectively together. And it's perfect to then now hear a little bit from Charles, who business owner out of Chiang Mai, but also has been doing quite a lot in the volunteer capacity for some of the issues around fire fighting and the pollution in the northern region. So over to you, Charles.
Great, thank you. Please interject if you have any difficulty hearing me. I am Charles Turner. I'm the owner of Food for Thought restaurant here in Chiang Mai, among other things. First of all, I just want to say thank you for allowing me to be here among such prestigious people. I'm grateful to share my view on things. I am a long-term resident here. I've been here for 12 years. I haven't been working specifically in the space to clean air, but I am a passionate, anyone who lives in Chiang Mai for as long as I have becomes passionate about this issue, and eventually somewhat knowledgeable, although I would say most of my knowledge has probably come from also working in the NGO space, working a lot with individuals who are among the groups of people who do burn, and they have their reasons. And I've come to understand those, and those are interesting to talk about. And I will get back to that, but I would say that this particular year, I mean, every year has been getting worse. This particular year affected me more personally than ever. So my passion for it, I guess, has grown considerably. So this particular year, a lot of people know, it's been well documented that the fire on Doi Suthep, the front side this time, so a lot of times it burns on the back side. This time it was the front side, was a pretty extreme ordeal for people in Chiang Mai, and that included the Doi Kham area. So the fire extended down into that part of Doi Suthep National Park, and that's actually where I live. I'm blessed to live back there in a community in the jungle. And in fact, one day we were driving home and we were not allowed to get back into our house. The whole area had to evacuate. We had to evacuate our community for an unknown period of time. It turned out to be over a couple of weeks. Firefighters were fighting in the area. And, I had to explain, hey, this is my house. And they said, well, you need to go get, whatever belongings you find important and then leave. And so that was obviously quite upsetting and aggravating. And in addition to all the aggravation that it brings, the smoke season. But around that same time as, of course, it was about mid-March, that was when, the COVID thing was really ramping up and the lockdown was looming. And my team, my wife and I, we were looking down the barrel of the gun, and we kind of saw that because of the economic shutdown, lots of people were going to suffer. Lots of people are going to lose their jobs and be without food, and so many Thai people are living close to the edge anyway that we knew this was going to be a big problem. And so we made the step forward to start feeding people and providing free food to the local community. And this was back on March 16th. We had no idea if this was going to turn out, if anyone was going to need it. A lot of our staff thought it was unlikely. But the first day there was 35 takers, the next day 100, the day after that 200, and since then we've been doing 400 meals per day, up to 12 to 15,000 meals since March 16th. So, but with all that going on, we just felt like, well, we're in the game of providing help to people through food, and we learned that there's 100+ people really truly risking their lives, there's no other way to say it, up on Doi Suthep, volunteer firefighters trying to put this dangerous fire out, which of course directly affected the whole community, including my family. So we decided we were going to extend what we were doing and start feeding those people, and we fed them throughout the fire, basically until they finally put it out. And one of the things that kind of astounded me is that all the people that were fighting the fire were volunteers, that they weren't, to my knowledge, compensated in any way. They were up there all day long and sometimes through the night, and they were not being fed. There was no sustenance for them. In fact, I would say we led the charge to start driving more food up that direction. Lots of people donated eventually. But, once the fire was gone, that whole experience, that was wonderful. But I became that much more passionate about the whole thing, and realized that, if you're going to be a resident, continue to be a resident in Chiang Mai, you're going to have to put, some skin in the game and start trying to help out wherever you can. And so that's kind of why I'm here. I personally think that the biggest issue, there's obviously government policy that can help. But I also think I'm a huge believer that, personal responsibility is the way forward. I think more people need to understand, their particular actions, their purchases, and how that affects the whole thing. And I have more to say about that later, but I'll get off my platform now. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And it really ties very much to the conversations that we were having last week, which was focused on some of these complexities, and really appreciate, we just heard from, if you're just joining us, a few people have just joined. Our first few speakers already have been sharing a little bit around the structure of change, particularly from a governmental or policy perspective. And Charles, thanks a lot, because you're sharing it from the ground up, from a citizen perspective of just acting for the community and then thinking bigger about the systemic issues and what can we do collectively. So I'm going to pass the mic over to our artist in residence for the talk, Kun Tawisak, based in Bangkok, but certainly with a global backdrop of experience and perspective of using art for the power of change. And if you would like to share a little bit around some of the things that you're envisioning doing, things that you've also been a part of, and just as your ordinary everyday activities of how you're perceiving and experiencing the air issues.
สวัสดีครับสำหรับท่านผู้เข้าร่วมที่เป็นคนไทยนะครับ Hi everyone, and first of all, thank you Charles for helping the local people in Chiang Mai. That's fantastic, because that's what we have to do as a citizen of the world, not particular area at all. Okay, first of all, I'd like to introduce myself first. My name is Theresa Nguyen. I am an artist and a citizen, and also have a difficulty to breathe every day. That's why the problem of air pollution has become a big part of my mission, among many others. My goal as an artist is to create a positive impact and changes to a community, society, and the environment. Most importantly, to create hopes and dreams as a driving force for the better living together through a creativity and also art activities. That's what I have been doing, and working with the community. I, as an artist, don't believe that art has to be in a white cube or function as a commercial object for a certain group of people to collect. as a cultural signifier for a social hierarchy or things like that. For example, in 2018, I participated in the Bangkok Art Biennale. This is the first Biennale in Thailand. I was fortunate enough to do a performance with Marina Abramovic Art Institute. My performance is walking from my house in Ram Intra area to BACC, Bangkok Art and Cultural Center. I spent 22 days walking from my house to BACC, which is downtown Bangkok from the suburb. It spent me like, 6 to 8 hours a day walking from suburb through a busy street of Bangkok. The first couple days is actually create the effect on my breathing system. I hardly breathe. Therefore, after that, I have to wear respirator, not a mask or surgical mask, but respirator, a really good one, because I cannot handle the air pollution in Bangkok. And I have to walk for like 22 days. After I get into BACC, I still have to perform again. But the visual impact of me walking on the street of Bangkok every day. And while I'm walking, I actually do a live Facebook broadcasting for others to see where I'm going and how I perform. So in this way, people will see that, well, the pollution, not only air pollution, water pollution, noise pollution, the structure of the city is so busy and it's become a mess. Therefore, this visual representation through my performance and my walking create the impact for others to really understand the pollution problem, not only air pollution, but for me, visually with the respirator is actually create a question for others regarding the air pollution. I, as an artist, my practice is always question the roles and function of art and artist. Also, a society in particular. I want to be a person to close the gap between ordinary people on the street and the art world. By creating a new possibility for art to function in a larger context with the cultural, social, and environmental issues. In the past few years, I focused on working with what I call social participatory art project. This became a vital strategy for me to work and to create with community, not in my studio, and exhibit not in the gallery or art space, but within the community itself. Because for me, it's very significant that art will relate it to life, not to exclude a certain group of people, particularly the issue of environment. That's very passionate for me. So to sum up, the way I practice is that my ways of working is to act as a cultural instigator and strategist, to plan, organize, and collaborate with all the parties and stakeholders, using community as a center, not from the bottom, not from the top down or the outside in, but the center out. And ultimately, there will be no center because, I try to create the relationship among each other, among each party within the community. After hearing the last two sessions, for me, it's very important not only to make art to address about the air pollution issue or any other issue, but also try to create a strategic plan for a profit sharing, both economic and environment, among all the stakeholders in the city and in the region. Because if you still have to find food to eat, how would you appreciate art? And it's actually impact economically with all the pollution that had happened. This is all for now. for me.
Great, thank you. I love, I think the common denominator amongst all the panelists is strategy, and I am hearing that from you, and I love the idea. We normally keep reusing this narrative of bottom up or top down, but you're saying from the center. So already really appreciate that reframe that you're kind of provoking us to think about less about structures in terms of the hierarchies that we're conditioned to think of them in. Last but not least, our final panelist before we move into Q&A. And I just wanted to mention, if you joined us, we do have Q&A going on menti.com, and the code is, so you can join 772819. I think we'll type that in the chat box. The chat box is for translation at the moment, so all the Q&A we're curating on our menti.com platform. So far, we have 9 questions, I see. So over to Jeffrey, please. Share a little bit more about, from the private sector lens, the Bangkok-based lens, how you're seeing the center out strategy and opportunity as well.
Yeah, hello everybody, and thank you for inviting me. Yeah, in some ways very similar to Kuntawisak. I hope I got that right. No, so I'm really interested. My business is a payments and supply chain finance business. And so we tend to look at the flows of money and the flows of value between buyers and suppliers of goods and services, and ways of incentivizing those. So I think, like Christine said, you know, you can look at that through a financial lens, which is what is the economics of you know, for example, crop burning, which causes a lot of air pollution, like who's the buyer, who's the seller, and stuff like that in a purely financial way. But I think that this sort of triple bottom line is kind of, is important in that too. So it's not just about the economic impacts, it's also about environmental impacts and social impacts, and sort of looking, in a way, I think what we're trying to do is look at supply chains in that way, which is, okay, what is the financial supply chain here? And what's the economic, or sorry, the environmental supply chain here? What's the social supply chain? And then actually just really tangibly get in there and try to kind of throw a screwdriver into the wheel maybe, or like change it, and try to realign the incentives. And we think that I've been quite focused on crop burning, less focused on the forests, although I know that's also a massive issue. But we're really interested in seeing if there's ways that we can economically incentivize changes of behavior that do have bottom line impacts. And I think that whilst like being very financial about it, you know, makes it very numeric and maybe a bit cold. At the same time, I think that there are investors and there are companies involved that do see other benefits than just pure profit. So I think it's just trying to adjust and align these things and tap into sources of funds that want to incentivize these things, and then really get stuck in with the stakeholders, the economic stakeholders, or the finance, you know, the kind of the supply chain, and trying to change it. And I think that one thing that I think is a great example, and perhaps I should share some links to it and stuff, is at least in the field of sugarcane burning in 2007. The Brazilian sugar mills, you know, with some pressure and help, actually said, "Look, we're gonna get rid of this." And I think now pretty much Brazil has no crop burning of sugarcane, and it's the biggest sugarcane producer in the world. And they've done that in the course of about a decade. And I think it's just like kind of inspiring, especially when you're looking down the barrel of this problem that just seems so massive. But I do think that if you get the financial kind of tweaking right, and you know, with some air cover from the regulatory side and the advocacy side or activist side, I think that it's definitely a problem that can be tackled in a way that is beneficial to everybody. Everybody could benefit, and that's really what we're interested in doing. And I have been very passionate about this, especially since having a dinner with another Christine, who I believe is she's in the lower right-hand corner of my screen, where we were just like, we're so sick of talking about this, you know, like, why do we have to always talk about air pollution? Like, okay, we're gonna do something, you know, like, and I think Christine was ahead of me on that, but that kind of thing, like, I really don't want to do any more of these Zoom things, you know, like, it's like, how do we get out of this cycle, you know, like, and that's to me quite inspiring as well, is just trying to figure out a way to really latch in. And I have been distracted actually in the last like month and a half. I've been part of a team that's been doing supply chain for like ventilators and like bags and weird stuff I'd never knew existed. But like, but anyway, so I'm kind of pushing ahead on two fronts, but that's what we're up to.
Great, thank you so much. So what we're gonna do next, so Jeffrey, thanks for sharing that. And also you alluded to some examples of things that are working from a systems perspective in other spaces. Towards the end of this session, and I'm already looking at the Mentimeter, we have even more questions at this point, which we'll get to, but we're going to actually pass the space over to everyone on the call with us to kind of crowdsource in real time these types of things, and also an opt-in for what we can do together concretely next. But what I'd like to do next is Kunwina has a question for the panel. While she's going to ask this question, and then we're going to move more towards the audience Q&A. So literally on the screen right here, just to remind you, if you go to menti.com and put in this code, these questions appear on our panel, and we'll share these questions in a moment. So Kunwina, could you share a little bit about some of the things that were coming up for you and how they might connect with some of the panelists?
Right. I have a few questions for the panelists. It's more sort of thought-provoking questions that we're trying to sort of to get your perspective on things. The first question really would be addressed to our first speaker, which is Dr. Wirun. Given the close link between air pollution and health issues, could you perhaps share about the role that the Ministry of Public Health has been taking in addressing this issue? And also, as someone who straddles between a civil society, a civil servant role, and that of an active citizen, can you also talk through some of the challenges and opportunities you see in resolving air pollution?
Thank you. This is a very important question, because the air pollution should be framed in a way as a health issue. So because of it is a health issue, it's the role of the Ministry of Public Health. What we are trying to do is to mobilize the resources that we have in the Ministry of Public Health to support the citizen to protect themselves in a way, because we are a part of the government. So we have to use the same standard of the air quality reported system in Thailand. That is a little bit making people confused, because people in Thailand, when they check the air pollution status, for example, they use the private sources such as the Air Visual or AQICN, but the Air for Thai of the government report a little bit lower than the other sources. It have a reason there. So what I'm trying to do is I work within the Ministry of Public Health to create another way to address it as a health issue. So we have to make it quicker for the sensitive population. So that's why we are trying to address that we need the air quality health index. This is a way that we try to use our health perspective to make the air pollution issue to be more focused on health rather than tying it into the economic problem. That is the other way to do. So it's like in the government itself, there are many institutions that we can try to connect. Like what I'm trying to do is I'm a doctor and a civil servant working in the Ministry of Public Health, so I can do something a little bit more easier than other people. Many other good people in the government, they want to do something, but because of the bureaucracy and the structure of the public administration, make them unable to do what they want to do. So that's why we have to create the platform that is a multidisciplinary and and multiple stakeholders to come together. And the Clean Air Network is like another platform that we can work together as an active citizens that we all are. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Weena, did you have one more question you wanted to throw at the panel? Or otherwise, I have a few from the Menti Q&A.
Yes, we had a list of questions, but specifically, let me throw the question to specifically, this is a question for Christine that we had. Christine, specifically because one issue about air pollution that's very difficult to address within just Thailand alone is the issue of transboundary haze. I just wanted to know where you foresee the role that UNDP has to play in helping to address this issue.
And let me just add on real quick, Christine, sorry, putting back on the co-moderation hats. I'm just noting that out of the 14 questions in the Mentimeter, 3 of them are actually addressed to wondering what is the UNDP doing, specifically in terms of what is the most crucial issue here around the 2.5 issue, and also how might UNDP be addressing not only the transboundary point that we know is just making, but also assisting government more specifically. So I think a lot of people are curious to hear what does that look like? What is that role? So over to you, Christine.
Okay, so as I started, I was trying to be quick. I mentioned things like systems, realizing everything is intertwined, and that we look at the drivers. I think the average person, I'm not saying it's everyone on this call, but the average person that thinks of air pollution, as I said, thinks of the symptom of it. And the old way of dealing with it was to regulate it. So you put fines on people for polluting, or you put a law or cap on what emissions should be. But that's not addressing the driver, because what people do is they just work around the regulation. And especially when you look at we haven't done a complete systems map of players, sources, the motivations between people. We haven't done that as yet, but that is what we would like to bring to the table. Basically, what we want to do is to come to any given country, and of course, UNDP has country offices in most of the countries in Asia Pacific region, all over the world, but we're talking about Asia Pacific region. And one of the things that we would be looking at, as I said earlier, is you're pulling all the players together. There can be government, private sector, CSO, and we really need a space for the informal sectors. Informal is anyone that isn't formally, employed. These can be people who work in waste. They can be people who do gigs in agriculture, seasonal workers. It can be any number of things. But the point is that you want to bring them together and really understand the motivations between everyone for how they act and why they act. Why is this important? In general, I also come from a background, environmental science and pollution and waste background. And in my experience, anywhere in the world, whenever you see, let's go to the burning, the agricultural and forest burning. I have yet to think of a single time where that didn't have to do with inequality and lack of access by people. In the case of forests, most of the time, the burning comes because people are disenfranchised when it comes to land access. So they need the land for whatever reason. It could be for mining in some places. It can be for living, subsistence living. But the point is that some people just don't have access. So they have to go someplace, cut down some forest to get land, or to get whatever resource they want to get from under the land or the trees or whatever, to then go and sell to try to make a living because they just don't have access to solid and sustainable employment. In the case of agriculture, I mentioned I'm from Barbados. First place to make rum, sugar, we were king sugar forever. And coming from the 1600s, burning almost always was a sign of rebellion and inequality. And whenever you dig down at all of these other places, I'm from that Latin American Caribbean region. When you dig down, there's almost always something to do with a sense of some people feeling disenfranchised. And therefore, there's a sense of like rebellion. This is the way I can get at you. I can't get at you any other way but your pocket. There are cases, of course, where people also burn canes to get rid of snakes and things like that. But the point is that until you build in the value for why you shouldn't burn cane, which is what happened in Barbados. People figured out that if you don't burn cane, the sugar is better quality, you get better quality molasses, you could, and then they added on to the industry. You could make rum, you could make all of these cachet products, and they made better shareholding, if you will, between the workers and the wider population and the traditional planter class. They figured out that this was not, this have and have nots was not very stable. So everyone lost out. So when you start building in value into a sector and building in inclusivity and jobs and everyone sharing a bit more, you actually find that it becomes more profitable for everyone involved. When you build in social support systems so that in the off-crop season, people have something to do. So all of these things are, this is why I keep coming back to it, it's about the drivers. The air pollution is just a symptom. So we want to move away from that temptation to just regulate everything to looking at what can we do to bring sustainability to people, to jobs. Yes, the environment, human health, animal health, all of these things matter. Now, when I go to the transboundary thing, again, everyone thinks what transboundary is, it's a symptom. Very often how we saw what COVID has done to disrupt supply chains around the world. So we know that we're interconnected in labor, in what, industries or fragments of the value chain where things are made in a series. Sometimes people, send one part of the value chain across the border because they think it'll be dirtier, not realizing it's going to come back at you through the air or water. But, all of these exchanges are happening. So if we use the systems approach I mentioned, and because UNDP has offices in all the neighboring countries, we are actually able to simultaneously do this and form the interconnections between, so that the actions we're taking can take into account migrant labor, can take into account a way to make some sort of uniformity so that you don't have people, oh, I banned, burning something in one country. Well, I'll just pick up and run over the border and do it instead. It doesn't do any benefit. So that's what we kind of want to bring to the space, this idea of being kind of an integrator, a convener, and a neutral party, because of course there are a lot of tensions between all these parties. And so, having that neutral position and bringing in that systems and really trying to create a space for understanding motivations, and then building in solutions, co-creating solutions that will bring all of the assorted benefits I mentioned, and keeping everyone profitable and more stable, so we have more stability against future shocks, whether it's pandemics or economic shocks. I think that is what we really want to do, recognizing that once you do that and you green sectors and you have better stability, you start to automatically chip away then at all of those sources of air pollution and other pollution as well. I don't know if I answered okay, but that's basically it in a nutshell.
So let me mention, so I also work with UNDP, that's the disclaimer here on the innovation team, but Christine's role as integrator, that's literally on her title as SDG integrator. So the key points, what I'm hearing is around the systems perspective and ultimately looking at it from a variety of different angles. And what we've heard in the past two webinars as well, past two sessions, is there are so many people across the spectrum that have a point of view, have an incentive or disincentive to be a part of the issue and in tackling the solution. But what I appreciate from what you mentioned, and this connects with one of the questions from the Mentimeter, which is about how do we break silos? And that's part of what you are also mentioning, this acknowledging the real tensions that exist, but then how do we curate and convene? But we'll get into a few other of the Q&A that's coming on the Menti. I know that Kun Wina has a question for, I believe, two others on the panel before we transition. So over to you, Kun Wina.
Thank you. This is a question addressed to both Jeffrey and Charles. Charles, the question is about, we wanted to hear about your perspective of what the private sector role could be in terms of helping to address the air pollution situation, and all the way running the spectrum from MSME all the way to large corporates. Thank you. Over to you. Jeffrey, you want to go first? You've got to unmute first.
I was just telling Charles that his microphone was off. Mine was too. Charles, do you want to go first?
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the private sector, in finance and payments, for example, we build a lot of mechanisms anyway that do things like prepayment of suppliers for things that they're going to make to help them deal with their own cash flow. You know, that sort of thing is very standard in some ways in finance. And I think that if, as Christine was saying, that if you can connect some of these dots and be able to, you know, I'm very focused on the cane issue, not so much the forest, so it's different, but I think it might be structurally similar, but different. But I think that you can, if you know, there's capital out there that wants to invest in sustainable supply chains. If you can make a way, I think the private sector can be quite good at going in and tactically, executionally, just going in and setting up the structures to enable the people that need the resources to behave differently. That includes the mill owners and the farmers and the contract harvesters, whatever. You know, you can kind of connect those dots from an operational point of view, and maybe in some ways, like Charles was doing with the firefighters. I mean, you know, you run. I haven't met Charles, but I'm really inspired by that. And you run a restaurant business. You know how to make food. You know how to get it to people, and that's kind of what I think what private sector can do is leverage skills that are in economic, typical economic things, and sort of direct them in a way that's taking a different picture. I don't know.
Yeah, that's great. I think I'm unmuted. So many things that I might say about it, but specifically to my business and my little world, I think when you talk about supply chains and stuff, like this is one of the obvious things is that we're trying to be 100% organic, which at the moment is not possible, but is growing in its possibility as time goes on. I think when you talk about supply chains, we're trying to be as responsible as we can be, not only because we think that's the right thing to do, but that because our customers are demanding that's what they want. And so for us to win, we need to serve them the best that we can, and that's one of the ways that we can do that. One of the biggest challenges, I think, is also meat. We still serve meat, and I think that plays a big role in terms of all types of different pollution. And that's an issue that we're wrestling with quite a bit about what to do going forward with that. But that's something to consider. But I think you mentioned that you're mostly your concern is mostly in the the corn and by the way, anyone who's lived in Chiang Mai as long as I have, if you drive north on a motorbike, you will have seen the north transform substantially in the time that I've been here. So whole mountains have been clear cut to like if you go to Doi Mae Salong or Doi An Khang, whole mountains have turned to corn. And obviously the corn burns hotter and longer, and that's exacerbated this whole thing tremendously. And so certainly that's a big issue to look at. But as time goes on, I used to kind of rant and rave about that particular issue, which is definitely a big contributor to the problem. But as time goes on, I've kind of come full circle and kind of realized that there are some other factors at play that are really significant that I don't think, it's easier to, people want a culprit, they want a scapegoat, and I think it's easier to look at multinationals or big agri as the problem here, and they certainly are part of it. But I think, just as an example, my neighbor is very, I mean, I hate to say this, but very likely they were the person who started the fire on Doi Suthep. In an effort to get mushrooms. They're very brazen and open about it. They laugh about it, that this is what they do, this is what they like to do. And part of their justification for it, honestly, is that they've been doing this for generations and they feel like it's their right to do it. And that, in fact, the big agri farming is what is, exacerbated the issue. And if that would just go away, they could carry on with their mushroom burning. But, everybody's playing a role here, and people got to all accept responsibility. And so that's, and even like hill tribe people, for example, we talk about inequality, they're burning their terrace rice fields, and they have, hundreds, if not thousands of years of tradition of doing that. And they also feel like it's hypocritical for people in the city or in Bangkok or in Chiang Mai to say, hey, what are you guys doing? When in fact we're down here driving our, ethanol cars and, our aircon and all that stuff. So, but the fact of the matter is everybody has a role to play, including those who make purchases. So my wife's family, they know, they're from Chiang Mai, they know it's a problem. And they still buy these mushrooms, and they're like, they say, oh yeah, I know it's bad, but it tastes really good. So mai pen rai, no? And that's the frustration, is that everybody plays a role. And so everybody needs to take on more personal responsibility, including the private sector and how they conduct themselves. We're being hurt tremendously badly. And I think that's the last thing I'll say about it, is that, I think a lot of the private sector should band together against larger multinationals. They're sort of an adversary to us as well, because their beneficiaries are not here in Chiang Mai, and they're probably not really here in Chiang Mai, so they don't seem to care too much. But for us, it's destroying the community, it's destroying the economy. Tourism is dead. I would say the reputation of Chiang Mai has started to turn, and that's a big problem. It's really hard to win reputation back. A lot of the articles have been not very nuanced about the fact that this is a seasonal thing. So people start to associate Chiang Mai with just pollution in general, and much in the way that you might Mumbai or something like that. And that's really spelling a disaster for the future of the region. So I've said enough for now, but I have my hat in the ring with personal responsibility, people taking, how do they spend their money, all that stuff, Anyway, that's enough for me.
Wow, thank you so much. It's a really important story that you're telling and hearing. One is literally about the change and the impact. And I think we can all identify with the human experience of working with the constraints that we have and that each in our community has. So one of the things I'm noticing as a theme coming up in the Q&A on the Menti. So thanks again for everyone that's been adding some of the questions there. One is literally about what can we do, right? And that was also part of the point of this pop-up series. We put it together within the past 3 weeks. And it was not necessarily something that we had spent lots of time blueprinting, but we know we had to do something because we've been working on air pollution as a group for 6 months. And similar to what Jeffrey was mentioning and connected to the conversations he's had, tired of Zooms, tired of just meetings, let's do something about it. So with that, we do have something, and this is that personal responsibility piece that I guess we're inviting you to consider joining along with us, which is investing the next minute or two literally into contributing to this sprint. So right now, in real time, over the next 2 minutes, with you and your bandwidth and connection, we're asking you to fill out a Post-it note. And we're being very environmentally friendly and doing it COVID friendly, digital, friendly in general. This is a virtual Post-it note. So in the chat box, or if you saw it from your Menti slides, if you had locked in, if you click on this virtual note link, what you'll find is a very simplified digital platform form right here. So we have a slide that shows you in the sprint. So we're going to ask you before we wrap up and go into some of the next steps, because believe it or not, we do have next steps. We said this is a 3-part series, but we have more cooking. And we want you to be involved, of course. But in this, as I said, in the chat box, virtual air notes, you will find that there's a way in which you can share an opportunity you see, a challenge you see. Could be an example similar to what Jeffrey was mentioning in Brazil, an example outside of Thailand that seems to be interesting, or even an example inside of Thailand. And then other organizations that are out there working on this. So there are teams and teams of teams, many people working on it. And we are trying to build a better real-time database in collaboration with others. Our agenda is transparent. No one's getting paid here. We are literally just trying to help organize so that there can be more alignment. So if you could do that right now, that would be great. We're going to take, I'll show you what the end product looks like, which is right here. You might think, okay, well, does this just hang out on an Excel file or a Google Sheets? No, actually, this is going to go into a live crowdsourced map. So after we get your contributions, then we will share with you the link to where you can look into what everyone else was thinking as well as sharing. So any questions about that? Because it would be a shame and a missed opportunity if I was not clear enough. And we have 60 people on the line with us. We have others live streaming. This will be something we share in our follow-up. But before we move to the final closing, just wanted to make sure that we have that there and easy to access for you. How about this with the speakers? Does I'll just check in with the speakers. Is this working? This link that you see in the chat box, everything right here, opening up for you. There's a drop-down menu where you could just literally mention what you might have as an idea, a thought, a desire, or a wish. And then also, if you want to engage with us as part of our next stage that we're about to tell you about, you can opt in. There's an opt-in option too. And Madeline, yes, we have someone asking, can it be filled out right after? Absolutely. So if you want to pause and think about it, yes, but just, we wanted to keep it really easy. We know that, you know, bugging people after the fact is pretty unsuccessful a lot of times, 9 times out of 10, because we're all very busy and nobody likes to do forms, right? So we wanted to keep this really simple. It should take less than a minute to pen out. However, yes, absolutely, it's going to be live and we'll share it in our wrap up. With that being said, what I'd like to do is, moving towards the end as we close, some kind of synthesis of what we heard. And Laura, one of the co-leads for the virtual, sorry, for the series, but also for the Circular Design Lab, has some kind of recap. So over to you, Laura, to share a little bit more.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Yeah, great. So these are some key takeaways we populated beforehand, but it's been really amazing to listen in to the discussion, and thank you, Courtney, for including me here at the end. For me, is one of the key tensions in this conversation is between the visceral personal experience of air pollution and the collective or systems nature of a response. And so not only are you personally experiencing it in different ways, but then also, there's a lot of energy among this group, it seems, to act. So we've heard about different modes of communication for how we can communicate about this problem and learn more about the different facets involved, as well as different ways of acting, from walking down the street and filming yourself doing that and taking that small step towards building a movement, to changing the supply chain that is causing this damage to our environment. And also about a lot of different nudge behaviors that can kind of shift the system towards maybe a better future. So what was shared about mapping the different stakeholders and then taking personal action every day, as Charles was talking about. And I think the bottom line, though, is that there's a lot of energy to action, and I want to turn it back to Weena with that to really bring us home and talk about what we're planning for our next steps.
Thank you so much, Laura. As I mentioned to you earlier, the Thailand Clean Air Network is a group of volunteers who have gotten together. We actually are quite a broad spectrum. We've got an environmental lawyer, we've got an environmental economist, we've got Dr. Wirun, who's a public health expert, and we've also got a bunch of air pollution specialists on our team. And that's because we know that the solution has to really, the problem is very complex, and the solution itself then has to be as encompassing. So in terms of our next steps, what we've done, the Thailand Clean Air Network has been working on this issue now for over 2 years and a bit. We started off by releasing the white paper, which was a hyperlink that we provided after the first webinar, and you can go and look at that later. Since then, we've developed into a second, much bigger report, which is talking about the impact of air pollution, and that was documented in what we call the Clean Air Blue paper. And after that, we're going to develop into a third piece, which is
aiming at solution, which is called the Clean Air Green Paper. Okay, now the next step that we're trying to push in is we're going to move into a digital series where we will be walking through the conclusions from the blue paper. It's a 17-page chapter document, so it's very comprehensive, and actually have the authors talk to the audience and walk through the impacts. So some of the issues are pretty much a lot of the issues that we've been discussing here. So the economical solutions, the economic impact, you know, Christine mentioned that, and one of the things that our environmental economists have actually documented is the fact that the PM10, not 2.5, PM10, the increase of PM10 in 2018 cost Thailand economy about 2 trillion baht, right? That's worth about 12.64% of our GDP. So that is in economics term. I'm an economist by training as well. That is the externality that we have not taken into account when we talk about air pollution, right? So issues like that are going to be talked about and mentioned. And then in that series, we will also be talking about the legal ramification. We will be talking about the health ramification and the science behind it. And related to that too, we will also have a digital roadshow as well, where we want to, as a lot of speakers here have talked about, the solution has to be something that's bottom up. It has to be inclusive. It has to be participatory. So bringing in all the various voices. So I think as Charlie has mentioned, you know, it's not just talking. We actually want solutions that actually work for everybody. And the way it works, it's got to work well for the private sector. It's got to work for the government, and it has to work for civil society. So that's where we're moving, and it would be in a form of a fireside chat, and we would also run workshops as well, surrounding that. So we really hope it'll be an exciting series, and we hope you join us.
Great, thank you so much, Weena. So just to say, this was the third of the pop-up sessions. We know we're not just beginning the conversation, but we are amplifying and accelerating it to a degree, even with the COVID world that we live in, which to the point, if you've been tracking along with us, we were literally going to have a town hall face-to-face and have the gathering at SCAP, for example, to share more about the blue paper, et cetera. So we are, you know, in beta and evolving the approach as we go. So I put in the chat box some links to some of the recaps. What we did last week, which I'm opening as an invitation to others, is that we can close with the recording at the moment, stop the recording and stop the live streaming. And those that want to stick around for an extended Q&A, I know there's a lot of questions that were some very specific and some others, they joining in a little bit later in the conversation, just getting started with some big thinking. So let's do this. If you are interested and able, feel free to stick around. I will stop the recording, stop the live streaming, and we can continue a little bit of the conversation. But for those of you that need to leave, we really appreciate you taking the time. We certainly appreciate the panelists joining us, sharing their perspective and their personal, you know, experiences with us and building this community as we go. And the final thing is that we really hope and would appreciate if you could you know, contribute with the virtual post-it note and help us map the ecosystem so that is something that we can build off of together. So
can I just add one final point, Courtney?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I know when we talk about air pollution, it sounds like something that's just so complicated and involves so many different aspects of society. But I just want to remind people that at the end of the day, all the successful clean air movements have actually been driven by civil society. That's the only way it's actually worked historically. And as I think Charles has mentioned, it is really important that we all get involved in whatever way, in whatever capacity we can, because at the end of the day, it affects us all because we cannot survive without breathing. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So giving an applause to all and everyone else that's joined us along the way. And pausing the recording now. And if anybody wants to stay around, you can unmute your mic. We can stop the Menti, for example, and enroll that way. All right.
All right.
And